Hey, everyone, and welcome to Common Good Conversations, a podcast working to re examine and reimagine narratives at the intersection of faith, politics, and social issues by striving towards the principle of the common good. I'm Nick Brock, and with me today is my brother in law,
John Skinner.
There he is, all ready to go with his Metalheads t shirt featuring CP3 and what's
C3PO and R2D2.
I am
Jeez,
totally
you
not
just
a
lost
Star
so
Wars
many
fan.
points.
I know.
Jeez.
My street cred just went
Dropped.
down.
Plummeted.
Man, oh my God. But today we have the privilege of having with us a subject matter expert on local news in Ottawa County, and more specifically, Ottawa Impact, Sarah Leach. Sarah, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
You betcha. So, Sarah, you are the executive editor of the Holland Sentinel and a number of other local newspapers. Can you state how many news organizations you manage?
Yes, it's 28 papers across 4 states in the upper Midwest.
Okay. And how does that all work together? Like, why are you doing that? How does that work from the Sentinel as your job into all these other organizations?
Well, essentially, it's a construct in our company to manage local papers a little bit more effectively. So they're often to their own division of the company, and they have editors that are managing specific states across the country. I obviously manage Michigan, and there's not as many in the other states in the upper Midwest. So they decided to put Wisconsin, Minnesota, and South Dakota because we just have a few sparse properties across those states. So they align them with Michigan because they want to make, it geographically make sense and trust the instincts and the knowledge of the people that they already have working for the company.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, it's just an interesting little question that I have. So you are a graduate of Central Michigan and Baker College, and you've worked in newsrooms since 1998. I'm reading like straight from your bio, if you can't tell. You are a strong advocate for student journalists and serve as the chair of the Student Publications Advisory Board at Central Michigan University. Is that still true?
That is still true.
All right. Boy, all right. So you are a very busy woman, working your 40 plus hours. So I want to start here with this little question. So you were recently nominated for a Pulitzer Prize. So let me just cut right to the chase. Well, before that, a Pulitzer Prize is a prestigious award. This is for our listener, given by Columbia University for achievements in newspaper, magazine, online journalism, literature, and musical composition in the U.S. For your work, Sarah, covering Ottawa Impact, the far-right grassroots group that currently carries a majority on the Ottawa County Board of Commissioners. Sarah, how do you feel about this nomination?
Well, I don't really like to talk about it because it's weird.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I mean, I think I got into writing because I didn't really want to talk about myself very much. I much more preferred writing and talking about others. I am honored beyond belief. It's something that I didn't think would ever happen in my career trajectory because I usually operate behind the scenes, as a majority of my career has been editing. So I'm helping to make other people shine, and I was more than happy with that role. And obviously extraordinary circumstances sort of changed that in 2023. But I kind of liken it to the bat signal. When I'm no longer needed, I'm going to go back into my bat cave and go back to doing my normal role.
Yeah. Sarah, can you expound on that piece a bit, this bat signal and extraordinary circumstances? I mean, obviously you were nominated for the coverage that you're doing of Ottawa Impact. For our listener who may not know about Ottawa Impact, or for those who know everything about Ottawa Impact, why are you and why is the Holland Sentinel covering this story on a weekly basis, essentially since they took office in January of 2023?
Well, I think primarily how it started was that there were unprecedented decisions that were being made right at the outset. And that's not entirely unusual when you see a a change in a public body where maybe one political party might take over when historically the other political party was in control for a long period of time. But what we saw here is kind of a almost broad rejection of historical practices in terms of process and procedure, not following their own bylaws. Sudden changes to the agenda where only a certain number of people that are within the public body itself, this in this case the County Board of Commissioners, was privy to what was going to happen. And then we thought that things were going to settle down a little bit once the flash in the pan big decisions were made in January, firing the county administrator, changing the corporate legal counsel, trying to remove the health officer. Some of those were expected. The closure of the DEI office, that was something that that group campaigned on. But some of these decisions were not expected, at least from our perspective. We knew we were going to have to pay pretty close attention to what was going to be going on in 2023, but I don't think anybody expected that each week there was going to be something fresh, something new, some other process that was suddenly going to be changed when really there was no reason for it that we could see. And so part of our job as journalists is not just to report what's happening, but we have to try to analyze things in real time, put them into context, and then make them make sense to the people that within the community that these people represent. That has been a continuous challenge because I'm trying to make things make sense, and sometimes they just don't make sense. And we have this source void where we're not really able to access the members of Ottawa Impact. They do not engage with traditional media of any kind. It's not just the Sentinel. They don't give TV interviews. I think that they do some interviews with some right-wing media, but that's about it. And so then if you can't get access to primary sources, you have to use secondary sources. So how people are reacting to the decisions that are being made by the primary source that you don't have access to. And so this has sort of been like this cascading effect where the decisions that they make usually will do, I think that in any other situation, we would have one, maybe two stories about the initial decision, action, behavior, then the consequence, reaction, effect. But these are so closely aligned together where each week there's something different that we're still catching our breath from the previous week before the new thing happens. And it just doesn't seem to be losing any steam. And so that's why there's so much coverage that's going on. We're really just reacting and trying to anticipate what's next.
Mm-hmm.
Can you give us a little example, week to week, what it seems like is happening from, what they did like last week to this week, type of thing?
Yeah, I think that probably the best example was recently with the budget negotiations with the health department. And this budget was submitted. So the department had submitted their proposed budgets back in May. Budget negotiations, in theory, should have been happening over the summer, and we did see some indication that that's at least what the administrator's office was representing in some of the commissioner meetings. But really, the push to cut the health department did not happen until August, and it just set off this chain of events that it's totally unprecedented. I've never seen anything like this, where every couple of days a budget revision would come through. We had the health department saying one thing, then we had the administrator's office and the commissioners saying a different thing, completely diametrically opposed information. So then the health officer was trying to get her perspective to the public. She uses the health department social media accounts in order to get that message to the public because she feels like she's not effectively able to work with the administrator's office. Then the administrator and the chairman of the board take over the social media accounts and then put their own news press release onto the health department's social media accounts. I mean, we've never seen anything like this before. It's just it's so difficult to explain, again, how these things are happening, what is happening, putting it into context as to what led up to these events. And then in the meantime, the budget still continuously kept changing every 2 to 3 days as they're taking money here, they're moving it around here, they're adding funding there. That just doesn't normally happen in a traditional budget cycle in terms of the planning process. And I think that dragged out for about 6 weeks.
Yeah. So Sarah, you've mentioned a couple of times how what's happening with Ottawa Impact, the decisions, and then how you are covering it with the Holland Sentinel. It's very unprecedented, very unusual. You're trying to figure out what is happening. So given that already, how can you refer to any outside reference, maybe nationally, for for something that might be similar? Like, if this is unprecedented here, like where are we finding this type of thing where some government officials are not speaking to the local press, or doing things very insular and not letting people in, the community reacts? Where do you see that happening elsewhere, if at
Well, I
all?
think we actually saw a little hint of this locally in the past 5 to 10 years. In the congressional races, this is before redistricting, and I think in the latest congressional cycle, just in the last fall, we traditionally had seen debates happen between some of the candidates. So in this case, that would be Bill Huizenga. But I know that when Rob Davidson ran against him 2 cycles in a row, there was one debate, I think, in the very first. They wanted to. Huizenga's team didn't really want to debate Davidson's team. And that was probably the first time that we saw something that was on more of a broader office, where there was this pulling back of engaging in the traditional process of the media helping to serve to get the information about the candidates to the voters. That's always just been a historically recognized practice. Voter forums for the League of Women Voters, it started to trickle down into the mayoral races, and there were requests, and this is going back probably about 6 years, where we saw there was this pullback of Mayor DeBoer. Now she's a state rep, where she really didn't want to debate some of the people that were running against her. I think that was Jay Peters 2 times, and then now we have Mayor Box in there. But so we've seen some hints of this locally anyway. We've never seen something as extreme to the point where there's absolutely no recognition of the local media other than to criticize it occasionally. There's no, we don't want to comment, or, this date won't work for us, which is kind of what we saw before. And I think that this is a reflection of national politics in the way that we're seeing what's going on in the House of Representatives right now. Obviously, Speaker McCarthy has been unseated. There's a little bit of chaos within the Republican Party. We're seeing that on the state level with the Michigan GOP. We're seeing that in local party politics. There's sort of this almost cannibalistic nature that is happening within the Republican Party locally and at large across the country. And no one's really sure where this is going.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So there's given all that, the response by Ottawa Impact, and more specifically Joe Moss, the chairman of the Ottawa County Board of Commissioners, he created a business called Simply American. It's a kind of a media website that, quote, restores truthful journalism and meaningful cultural conversations to the communities of West Michigan. And further, as an anonymous writer for Simply American puts it, because they have a number of, just for context for our listener, they have a number of anonymous writers for this, like Jefferson, Franklin, Madison, because I don't know why they want to remain anonymous. And so there was this article put out, and then Joe Moss even said, more specifically, that the Holland Sentinel is creating a false narrative and defamation by, number one, not being, quote, independent of outside interests and influences. Number two is not, quote, truthful, accurate, or thorough. And number three, does not hold to the highest standards of integrity and credibility. So essentially, Sarah, they are calling you and the Holland Sentinel fake news, in the same way that we've heard writ large about mainstream medias with the likes of the New York Times, the Washington Post. We could go on and on and on.
Fox News.
I don't know if Fox News is being called fake news, but they might just be fake news, according
to what
to
side of the aisle you're on.
Well, we won't go right there right now. We could talk about the Dominion lawsuit, how they just killed Fox News, but that's another thing. So, Sarah, how do you respond to this criticism from Simply American and from Joe Moss that you're these things? Do you think it's fair at all?
Well, I think it's easy to not engage in the process and then criticize the process. I think it's easy to write whatever you want and not actually have to put your name attached to it so that you have no accountability. Real journalism has to do that. Real journalists have to put their name onto their content and they have to answer for their words. And, in terms of outside influences, we don't have any outside influences. I don't know what that's in reference to. I can guess. But,
Well, let's go there. I'm sorry, Sarah. Let's go right there for a second.
yeah,
So
yeah.
let's take a guess. So the Holland Sentinel is it accurate to say that they're owned by USA Today?
They're actually owned by Gannett, which also owns USA Today. So USA Today is the flagship paper of the company, and we have over 300 papers across the United States. So I mean, somebody owns a newspaper somewhere. I mean, all newspapers are owned by someone, whether
Mm-hmm.
that's a family, whether that's a collection of a small group of a small company, or whether it's a major media corporation. I mean, that's just how capitalism works. Uh, I think that in terms of the Simply American, I think it was an interesting flex, but I think that it was just done in a way where it just opens themselves up to additional criticism. So I don't really think that it's effective. It's just speaking to their base, which I think already supports them. But I don't think that they're going to win over any moderates or independents this way. I'm not sure if they even want to, but I just think that it's an ineffective way of trying to kind of play journalism. I don't think that any rational person would look at what is on that site and then say, well, obviously this is, the truthful,
Mm-hmm.
truthful journalism. And then this is the way that it's done, because they're not properly citing sources. They're not properly citing information. They also are not giving a fair shake to the quote unquote other side. It's just basically a propaganda tool. But I really wish that they just would sort of own that instead of trying to pretend like they're something that they're not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess that's my personal opinion too, in that little piece. Just own it, instead of saying that you're not um, that you're not that particular thing. Is that so? Then you would say, and I cut you off a little earlier, but so this criticism is not fair at all because you and your editors, colleagues have reached out to Ottawa Impact multiple times. Yeah, I mean, so back to this Simply American, and Joe Moss, they will say that there's a barrage of articles putting out on a weekly basis, but in those articles from the Sentinel, you mentioned that you reach out to Joe Moss, and so what does that process look like? And so I've tried to wrap my mind around this. So you or others, are emailing, calling Joe Moss, etc., to get their take on that. What then happens on your end?
Well, I think, so we all know about this whole there's two sides to every story. Now, that can be true many times, but that's not always the case. And I think that it's really important to note that in journalism, when reporters are trying to report on a story, we have an ethical obligation to give everyone equal access to take part in the process. That's all that you're really guaranteed, is because we're supposed to be these independent arbiters of what is going on and reporting the events as we see fit, because we are the lay people. We're the observers. We're the fly on the wall. And so we interpret what we see as if we are a representative to the public to explain what happened at an event or a meeting that they don't attend. They pay for subscriptions to newspapers so that they don't have to go to city council meetings. We understand this. But I think that, in the case of Ottawa Impact, in the beginning, in the early months, we were doggedly trying to pursue any kind of engagement. Actually, it started last summer. I reached out to them before they were elected and got no response. We have never gotten a response. We have gotten a couple of of criticisms from their supporters. And I think that I heard from one commissioner in particular, apropos of nothing. It actually wasn't in response to a request for comment. It was just sort of a commentary on the coverage, but this was months into 2023. And we, at a certain point, we just have to sort of throw our hands up and just say they've never responded to requests for comment. I mean, we can keep sending the emails for every single story, but it would clog up my sent inbox. I mean, they know how to find us. They know where we are, and we all know that they're actively rejecting to be involved in that process, and then we'll immediately turn around and say how unfair the process is. So they just have to own that piece of it, I think, and so we own ours.
Mm-hmm.
Out of curiosity, if you had the opportunity to interview them, who of the Ottawa Impact would you like to interview, and what type of questions would you have asked them? Just in case they listen to this podcast later, they can get an idea.
Yeah, because this is going to be right up in their wheelhouse.
Well, who knows?
Who knows?
If I had my choice of commissioner to interview, I think I would want to interview Sylvia Rohde.
Okay.
I think that she's a really interesting personality in this whole process. We don't necessarily hear from her as much because Joe Moss is the face of Ottawa Impact, but it's my understanding that she is actually the author of a lot of the resolutions. I would really be interested to know what her background in history is and kind of how she comes up with some of these ideas. I'd really like to understand that part of the group better. Because we have a lot of transparency and process in what they're doing. We just kind of get the end result after clear discussions have been had elsewhere. And so we just have to deal with whatever happens in public meetings.
So really, really looking for a good, honest discussion with them, and not like a hit piece. And so we've covered you guys for 6 months, and we've got the stance now. Just come on in, we'll talk to you, and then
right.
Prove everything that we've done for 6 months. Type thing.
If Joe Moss called me tomorrow and asked me to talk to him, I would talk to him. I mean, I it's not that I'm rejecting them, but I'm also not going to be the kind of journalist that just pretends like they're not snubbing us at every single moment and every opportunity, and that they're not taking part in the process. I mean, you just call it as you call it. You got to call the balls and strikes. And that's part of what we do too, is we hold elected officials accountable. That's an uncomfortable process, no matter what the political climate is, whether it's really tame things that are going on, whether it's controversial things that are going on, whether it's Republicans or Democrats. I've had some conversations with some people who are advocating for change on the Board of Commissioners next year. And I have told them that even if or when that change happens, that we're still going to be pretty hypercritical of the board as an entity because of all of the things that have happened in 2023 and beyond. And there's consequences to these decisions that have been made. And so we're going to be hypercritical of who comes in afterward to potentially change things back or modify decisions that were made now. That's not going to go away just because, Ottawa Impact may or may not still be in control of the board. Yeah.
Shawn, that was, so I really love that question. Like, who would you interview? And Sarah, that was an interesting answer. Sylvia, I mean, in reading just from Simply American, they have this little piece called, Thought Leadership, and she's written a couple pieces from that. But I find her too to be very articulate in her writing. And I found a lot of their pieces to be, well written, to be put together. So if somebody didn't know exactly what was going on, you could read it and go, okay, well, this seems to be articulated fairly well, and I can kind of move in that direction, just in terms from their standpoint. So with you wanting to first interview Sylvia, I'm going to go somewhere around here and figure out, okay, who else would be of most interest to interview? I would say maybe like Lucy Ebel. She doesn't seem to say much, or from Commissioner Bell Knapp. These folks seem to be more quiet and kind of hanging out on the sidelines. Or maybe I'm not correct in that. But from your perspective, who would be another interesting character? And maybe we could just leave Joe Moss to the side because everybody wants to speak to Joe Moss,
Okay.
as we know.
Yeah.
What would that be for you?
I think that my second choice would be Allison Miedema. I think that she also, we don't hear from her as much, but she has had some pretty interesting perspectives, and some opinions that aren't necessarily completely one-sided. There seems to be some recognition there, at least, or acknowledgement of some of the criticisms that have come to the board, either in anticipation of or in reaction to some of the decisions that they've made. There seems to be a heavy amount of compassion on her end, although she still is a full member of Ottawa Impact and votes with them. I would love to be able to sit down and talk with her and kind of understand her story, and how she came to be inspired to run for office, because we weren't really aware of her before. I think that we knew about Sylvia Rhodey a little bit because of a lot of the parental rights things that have been happening during the pandemic. She was a known personality in the Allendale area with the school district there, and had spoken several times to the Board of Education. But yeah, I think that Allison would be my next choice.
Oh, cool. Okay. All right, Shawn, did you have something?
I kind of did. I'm trying to formulate the actual. I was just trying to think, like, do you feel like some of them in Ottawa Impact are a little bit more open to crossing aisles a little bit more, but they might be a little handcuffed by being, they have to toe the party line, but maybe a couple of them out of the, what is it, 9, might want to be able to do some more outside of just being toeing the line?
Yeah, I think that we can definitively say that right now they have 6 seats on the board. So we know that Commissioner Bonema, who was a fully fledged member in the beginning of 2023, very publicly left the group, I think around March. Rebecca Curran was sort of aligned with them, but never actually signed their contract, so did not receive any funding. She often does vote with them, but she is a little bit more of an independent thinker, although I think that she's more ideologically aligned with OI. And Kyle Terpstra, he is an enigma to me. He's he's in his second term. He doesn't really talk very much. He doesn't really kind of indicate, what his big issues are. So I might actually want to interview him, even though he's not an OI member. He does often vote with them as well. So really they're down to 6, which is a pretty razor thin margin on the board, depending on what the issues are. So with all these recall efforts that are going on, who knows what the board makeup is going to be after May.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Sarah, I'd like to take a little pivot here, from Ottawa Impact, and talk about how people receive news these days. So, there's just a swirl of information and misinformation that surrounds, people on a daily basis, from Facebook, X, formerly known as Twitter, or the artist formerly known as Twitter, YouTube, just in news outlets, 24/7, 365. So how is a regular person who has just this low level of interest for engaging politics, like a Shawn Skinner, how, given like 15 minutes a day that a person sets aside for flipping through their phone or whatever, how would you recommend a person go about discerning where to receive information? Because quite frankly, in my opinion, it's either sink or swim. Like, you can open up your phone and you can just go headlong and get lost into so many different places. What is this thing that you would recommend to people for how to discern and decipher fact from fiction?
Oh gosh, isn't that the big juggernaut? Well, I think so. Yeah, one of the reasons why we're in the state of confusion that we're in today is because we have ultimate access to just about everything through the internet and social media, and that has caused the floodgates to open. But we're really not teaching civics and news literacy in our schools, and so we're really not having our children be prepared for how to be their own gatekeepers of information, because that obviously was a trusted role in generations past by these mega networks that had these very trusted news broadcasters. And when Walter Cronkite said it, you believed it because he was the person, he was the face of the news. Now it's a lot more murky. And I think that if somebody wants to be keeping up with what's going on locally, my recommendation is to find whatever the local newspaper is. If there's a couple, then that's fine. They should have apps for phones. They should have some sort of a presence of a newsletter if they're worth their salt. Excuse me. And I think that you should do the same for the TV networks. You might get a little bit inundated in the beginning when you sign up for some of these services, but they almost always are free, at least to sign up for the apps. You will get news alerts, and eventually you're going to be able to figure out which one is going to be pumping out the most content. You're going to be able to read the headlines, and I think that even a fairly new person to this sort of thing will be able to decipher between what is written as clickbait and what is written as a legitimate story. I think that we all have like an innate sense of how to look at that, and you're going to be able to form a relationship with that service, whatever it is, whether it's TV, whether it's newspapers. You're going to find a habit of thinking, oh, I've read 5 or 6 stories on this topic from this news site before, and I tend to think that this is some reliable information because I find that it's being presented to me in a credible way. But we have to start thinking critically about those things as we're reading it. You can't just get things that are happening on Facebook and just, flip through what your friends think about something and then form an opinion about that. We all are responsible for being a part of this process, so that we're really holding our media accountable as well too. Because if we don't do that by pulling back when we see concerning behavior, concerning coverage, things that we think aren't very fair, it's okay to cancel that service. That's capitalism. That's the way that the process is supposed to work. And that news organization should make adjustments to make sure that they're not alienating the readers.
Mm-hmm. What could you define? Because in our conversations that we've had, Shawn, you've often used the word clickbait when we talk about discerning news. Yep, algorithm and things. Sarah, how would you define that clickbait? What should send a signal to the reader like, oh, okay, this is definitely clickbait and I should stay away? How would you define that?
Well, I think the easiest way to define it is if what's in the headline isn't answered in the story, that's a dead giveaway. So, you won't believe number 7. Those kinds of headlines are, in my opinion, ridiculous. I think that it just leaves a bad taste in everybody's mouth, and it's not really worth the flash in the pan response that you're going to initially get from the article, but then you're going to see people immediately close and not. So we measure lots of different things, not just page views, but it's also the duration of time that people spend on our sites. And if you really want to, maintain your operation and grow, then you better be watching what that analytic is. And so if you're writing headlines that ask a question that isn't answered, just to get to people to read about the idea, but it never speaks to the point. I've done that a few times with some news sites, and it just frustrates me to no end. And I think that it's okay to be frustrated about that. And I think that does that brand damage when they do that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it is frustrating when you see things that you read the headline, clickbait or whatnot, and okay, I want to read this, and then you get into it, and you're 10 minutes into something, you're just there's nothing here.
Right. I
just wasted 10 minutes, and then you become frustrated and just, I'm not going to read it anymore. I'm not going to read anything. All of it's junk.
Right. Or sometimes when it's on a really mushy topic where the headline is written in a definitive way, but then when you start reading about it, it's like, well, this might happen, this could happen, here's how it could happen, and then you're thinking, well, wait, is it happening or is it not happening? I clicked on this to for somebody to tell me whether what is going on here, and all I got was a lot of additional questions that go unanswered. So that's always a frustrating experience, and
conspiracies or theories, and
journalists have to put themselves into the reader's shoes. what are the questions that if I were trying to explain this to somebody who didn't know what was going on, which is partly why my articles are so long, is that I'm trying to provide context for how we got here. I'm trying to explain like what the interdynamics are that led to what, and then that explains why this might be interesting or controversial or noteworthy in some way. We always have to be thinking about what the reader wants to know. And you
Mhm.
can't assume that they're reading everything up until that point. I mean, we have new readers coming in all the time, and we have to somehow explain the very complex dynamics of local politics in Ottawa County, within a matter of maybe 5 to 10 paragraphs before they might lose interest. So that's always a continuous challenge.
Yeah, so I want to pick up on that piece because going back a bit to our discussion, that has been a criticism again by Simply American and Joe Moss that in the continuous coverage, there's this repetitive nature about how Auto Impact began and what's happening. So there are these rather lengthy the articles, but the question is there like a best practice for journalists that they implement in terms of, okay, I have a story to tell. I cannot tell all of it right now. I need to chunk this in terms of, time that people have. If they have 15 minutes, they're going to spend 5 minutes perhaps reading this. What is that best practice to engage folks to keep current on what's going on?
Well, yeah, I think that so in journalism school we call this the nut graph. It's the
Nut graph?
nut, NUT.
All right. I
And
Shawn Smarga, just be clear.
and so it's important information that immediately provides context in the most succinct way possible, because I think that in the case of Ottawa County, Ottawa Impact, what they're doing, people are like, well, wait, what's Ottawa Impact? Because it's not immediately recognizable for anyone who would just kind of wander onto our site not having any context for anything. They don't recognize that as an entity. It's not Republican, it's not Democrat, it's not nationally known. It's just hyper local. And so you immediately have to put context to what is this? Where did it come from? So obviously these are people who are right of the right, and they have heavy faith influence, and they're a grassroots organization, and they really just formed a couple of years ago in the wake of the pandemic, and it was largely surrounding controversies over the lockdown practices that the state observed, and obviously the governor has been criticized a lot about that. But that's where this group was forged, was over a lot of anger about what happened during the pandemic, and they really don't want to have any of those things happen again. That gives the reader context to understand what is fueling some of the decisions that they're making now 3 years later. As they're doing their budgets and they're cutting the health department and they're talking about mandates to the health officer. A lot of us have moved on and don't necessarily think about some of the things that happened during the pandemic, but it's very front and center to this group. It's very important that in their opinion, that this not happen again. And I think that that's always noteworthy. It's always noteworthy to know what the motivations are of the group that is in a decision-making capacity.
Mm-hmm. So then perhaps this is why you've been nominated for a Pulitzer Prize, not just for your coverage, right? But in the way that you're doing it. I mean, anybody could cover, well, I don't want to say anybody, but a lot of people could attempt to cover what's going on, right? All across Michigan and perhaps, all the 50 states. Anybody can do that, but to do it well and to provide succinct information that allows people an access into what's going on, and also acknowledging that, okay, there is not the secondary voice for your primary sources. So, I mean, would that be an accurate description of why perhaps you think or others think too that you've been nominated for this Pulitzer Prize?
Well, I think I've had some conversations internally with some of my staff and some of my friends in the business. I think a large portion of my career has been coaching younger writers to be a little bit more confident in the way that they cover things, approach things, trying to say, okay, get out there, try to talk to as many people as you can. It's really intimidating to talk to people that you don't know, approach people that you don't know, especially over a controversial topic. I think that, again, it was sort of a bat signal situation where we were kind of scrambling to just sort of catch up and react to what was going on in the beginning of the year. And it just sort of stuck with me because now I've got my staff that are trying to cover the rest of the news because, as surprising as this is, there's a lot of other things that are happening in Ottawa County that need attention and that readers need to know about. I think that I've been in the business long enough where I'm comfortable knowing who I am. I'm comfortable with calling a spade, and I am not entirely concerned about whether or not somebody who voluntarily opts out of the process is going to then turn around and criticize it. That's your choice. But it's not going to change the way that I'm going to do my job. And I'm going to continue to still react to the things that you're doing and the decisions that you're making. And if you don't want me to write about it, then maybe follow some historically accepted practices in local government, and it probably would go away. So, it is what it is.
Yeah.
Now, when you were saying, it's hard to talk to somebody about things that are slightly controversial and whatnot, is it hard to try to get in those conversations with somebody that you don't know, and as a journalist, try to keep your potential biases of that subject kind of neutral for the sake of, writing and everything in journalism?
Yeah, I think that, I think that the best interviewers are people who can find a way to be compassionate and be relatable to the subject that they're interviewing without necessarily indicating endorsement or bias. And so it's a fine line to walk. I think that for a long time, journalism was sort of taught as this: you're of the community, but you're separate from the community. You're just you're just kind of hovering, like I said, a fly on the wall. You're seeing it, but you're not a part of it. I think that we need to be a little bit more enmeshed in community and be seen as real people and be able to be people in order to be able to relate to our subjects a little bit more. When I'm approaching somebody about a controversial topic, I just say, like if something bad happened to them, like for example, I have a piece that's going to be running, I think tomorrow, where layoffs have started at the health department. And this is related to the COVID grants that were eliminated. And so the positions that were tied to that, so there were half a dozen layoffs. And I talked to 3 people who were affected by that. And it's okay to say, hey, I'm really sorry that this happened to you. It's not an endorsement or a rejection of what the decision of the board is, but it's an acknowledgement of what the situation is. And I think that people will respond to you a lot more openly if you just kind of, are willing to say that to them. And then they say, thank you, I really appreciate you saying that. And then they're going to be able to open up to you a little bit more and share their story.
Gotcha.
Sarah Leach, executive editor of the Holland Sentinel, thank you so much for spending time with us this morning. I know that you've got plenty of work to do, so we very much appreciate your time and your work that you're doing. Before you go, how can listeners connect with you and your work? What do they got to do? Where do they got to go?
All you have to do is go to hollandsentinel.com.
Boom, done. Easy.
Yeah. I'm all over it.
All over. You also have a very active X feed, correct?
Yes, I that was kind of a very surprising caveat to this whole journey is the response that I got on Twitter, because I live tweet the Board of Commissioners meetings, and I have found an unexpected following from that people have enjoyed my commentary.
Yeah. Yes. All right. Well, thank you very much, Shawn. Any parting words for Miss Sarah Leach before she heads out?
I think we're good. I enjoyed the conversation and the candor and everything of our discussion, and it's been a pleasure meeting you, Sarah.
All right, Sarah, we're going to move on, so you can just click out of this meeting, and Shawn and I are going to wrap things up.
Yeah, good one.
Sarah.
I'm going to beat you to this one real quick.
Oh, huh?
What's your takeaway, Nick?
Real nice. Just take my shtick and put it right in my face. Man, I cannot. There's a lot. I appreciate her candor, as you mentioned, but this I can't get out this nut graph. I was like, I'm just as she's speaking, I'm picturing a nut, and thinking about, okay, is she meaning like all this information, like trying to put it succinctly in this small little piece where people
The
can then,
shell.
right, and then look at it and then, do whatever it
Digest it.
is. Yeah. So like this being this common practice, right, that they learn in journalism school, is that a journalist cannot, they only have so many words to use for a particular article and they have to get right to it. So for me, that makes a lot of sense because I've read a lot of her work. It makes sense that then to bring people in, to bring people up to speed, you have to provide this context. So
You got to distill it down a little bit.
yeah, so there is this. I don't know if she would say this, but there is this copy and paste element that you'll see in the articles about who Ottawa Impact is, what they've done. There's maybe two paragraphs, and then it will continue.
Well, it's
So
no
that helps
different
me
than the beginning
understand.
of the podcast when it's, hey, it's Nick, hey, it's Shawn, and we discussed this. You kind of have to set a precedent or set a scene before you move into everything, just to give everybody context right at the beginning.
Yeah,
I think. I'm not a journalist. I just
no,
play
you're
one on the
not.
internet.
I do as well. Just some amateurs with a podcast.
Yep, just like everybody else.
All right, friends. Listener, be sure to keep tabs on this podcast on our Facebook page at Vote Common Good West Michigan Primary, where we will be dropping episodes on a bi-weekly basis. So check this out there. So once again, my name is Nick Brock, and with me is
Shawn Skinner. If you guys have any questions or anybody else that you might think that would be interesting for us to interview, feel free to leave comments on either the podcast or the Facebook page, just like Nick was saying.
absolutely, that would be really helpful. And if there are folks that you want us to interview that are local, because we focus on things in Kent County, and Ottawa County, and perhaps if we go a little bit larger, just to the state of Michigan, we'd be interested in doing that. So that is that. Thanks for re-examining and reimagining narratives at the intersection of faith, politics, and local issues by leaning into the principles of the common good. We will see you next time, friends. Peace.